Well, hello, it is showtime. How are we doing, my friends? What an honor to have you investing in your time and joining us today. So excited to have you here, no matter where you find yourself. If you're out on the West Coast or on the East Coast, somewhere in middle America, thanks for joining us. We completely know that your plates are full and there's so many things that you are running and doing, whether you're a superintendent, a principal, whether you're teaching every day in a classroom or a librarian, whatever your role might be. Thanks for joining us today on Finding Common Ground. I'm ecstatic to be with you all today. I'm Tom Murray, and I at All4Ed, the Director of Innovation of our Future Ready Schools, our practitioner side at All4Ed, and I am so excited to be co-leading today's event with you all today with our CEO, the incredible Dr. Amy Loyd. Dr. Loyd, over to you.
You're so gracious. Hello, everyone. I want to echo Tom's gratitude for you joining us today. We know how important your work is, how busy your lives are as our wonderful education leaders in the field. And we hope that today's webinar is useful to you in providing practical, actionable resources and strategies and tactics for engaging your students, your families, your communities. And I just have the joy of working with incredible people like Tom and many others at All4Ed, and I'm grateful to be here with all of you today.
Awesome.
A quick note about All4Ed. If you probably know the incredible Tom Murray, you may know many other members of our Future Ready Schools team. I want to speak just a moment to our broader organization. All4Ed is a national nonprofit organization. We've been around for almost 25 years, and we work from classroom to Congress. We work across policy and advocacy, the world of practice, the world of collaboration and connection to ensure that we are building and sustaining meaningful, equitable policies and practices that support every single student in our nation to thrive. And so we think with a particular lens on our students who are farthest from opportunity, those who need the most resources and supports. And we want every student to have meaningful, joyful, choice-filled lives, and so that they have like the grounding in our K-12 schools to set a course of their choosing into the future. So All4Ed is a large organization that stands at your service and wants to make sure that we put in your hands the resources that you can use to help your students and your communities to be strong and continue to grow and thrive into the future themselves. Next slide, please.
Amy, yep. I love that. We are so excited. And I know as we get into, we're going to have some questions probably today, since we are doing this live today. If you have some questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. But Amy, what are we excited to bring our school and district leaders today?
So today we want to talk to you about some polling data that we did. All4Ed commissioned a pre-election survey of over 4,300 voters nationwide, and we did deep dives in 10 states. We did deep dives by different racial and ethnic subgroups. We did deep dives by young voters, employers and business and industry leaders, educators, and we did it just before the election between October 30th and November 1st to truly understand the mandate of the electorate. What do Americans really want and need from our education system without the influence of who won the elections? It's what are people thinking as we come into this opportunity of change in our country? And we commissioned this poll deliberately to be bipartisan. We worked with Lake Research Partners, which is known as a very strong, well-respected Democratic polling firm, and the Terrence Group, which is known and well-respected as a Republican polling firm, to co-create a poll that will really seek to get at the heart of where we are as a nation in our education system and what we want our schools to do for our children, for our future. And we're really excited to share some information from this poll translated into actionable ways that you can put this into practice. So we have been learning so much from this poll. I have to say it gave me a lot of hope. It gave me a lot of energy to continue to work together across our multiple areas of differences in our nation. We all carry the complexity of who we are, whether it's our geographic differences, our racial and ethnic differences, our political differences, our socioeconomic differences. We have so much more common ground to stand on than the mass media would lead us all to believe. So I love that this poll was fiercely bipartisan. The people we polled were, across the spectrum on all dimensions of our identity. And we have so much that connects us in our shared commitment to education.
Yeah, Amy, I love that. And just to jump in there real quick, when I think about turning on the TV at night, which I try not to do sometimes, it would feel like everything is so polarized. And I feel like So many out there would have us believe that there's no alignment and everybody's complete opposites in what they believe. And what this data shows us, that's just not true. There is so much for us to build on, and for our school and district leaders, so much for them to help build trust and build community at a time of some uncertainty.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll go through a couple of the top priorities that surfaced from the poll, but I will say, repeating back what you just said, Tom, we tend to hear from the vocal minority, from folks at the farthest end of whatever spectrum you're considering. And they're the ones who, are on the pundits on the news. They're the ones who create, social media posts that blow up. We see memes about the extremes in the polls, and that's really the vocal minority. We are truly standing in a space of where is the silent majority in this? We are not hearing the voices of we the people. The majority of Americans across our differences believe in so much in common, and frankly, these shared priorities reflect a degree of agreement that is almost unprecedented. Like, there's no other issue in our nation that has this degree of consensus across Republicans and Democrats, across Trump voters and Harris voters. We know those aren't a perfect diagram, one over the other, across our independents and our undecideds. We agree that we want to do things like support increasing early childhood education funding. We know how important it is for our youngest ones to have a solid start in connecting their heart, their passion, and their curiosity to learning, and how important early childhood is as a springboard to success over one's lifetime. We know that we, the people, see how hard our teachers work, and 78% of us across our differences support raising teacher salaries. That's not something we talk about a lot in the public narrative of education. We know, especially given that we've all recently lived through the pandemic, we know how important access to technology is. And 79% of us prioritize high-speed internet access in underserved areas. Like, thinking from an equity standpoint, how do we make sure that regardless of where you live, whatever your zip code is, whether you're in rural America, whether you're in the heart of a city, you can access the technology you need to engage meaningfully in education. Prior to coming to All4Ed, was leading our nation's career and technical education through the Office of Career and Technical and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And I was thrilled to see that 86% of us are committed to career and college preparation, career and college, the both and, not the either or. For both our middle school students and our high school students. And that 79% of us want training for teachers on the latest technology and approaches. We know that it's one thing to make sure that we all have the devices in our hands, the infrastructure in our schools, but how do we bring our educators with us to make sure that they continue to be at the leading edge of practice too? So this is just a smattering of some of the major findings from this poll. There's so much more that we would love to share with you, and we'll make sure that you have the access to all the links on our website. In terms of common ground, as I mentioned around college and career preparation, voters are united. Like, we agree more on this than we agree on our love for something like puppies and kittens. Literally, there's a poll on that. Voters are united in our support for high quality education that prepares young people for success in life and work. The college and career and connection to community piece is one of the most strongly favorably rated items from our poll across no matter what dimension of identity you seek. Across party lines and demographics, similarly, we want to support connecting education to jobs and to careers, recognizing that we spend as adults on average 90,000 hours at work, right? Shouldn't our young people have some meaningful choice and engagement about their futures, and make sure that that work is purposeful and connected to their vision for who they are, who they want to become, the problems they want to solve in their communities? So how do we provide our high school students with pathways for college and career so that every student, no matter where they sit in our great nation, can have meaningful post-secondary options and can launch a job that leads to a meaningful career? This was something that was deeply resonant. It's always been fiercely bipartisan, and I want to make sure that we hold this space for us to work across our differences. Voters across demographics similarly recognize the importance of students developing emotional and interpersonal skills for success in school and life. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the language nuances in this space, but we recognize that the foundation of skills that we need to thrive, whether it's in our work settings or in our families or in our communities, involves understanding how to navigate working across complexity, working across differences, working with others, regulating our emotions, ensuring that we are creating spaces for our young young people to grow and challenge themselves and thrive in interpersonal dynamics. And then the next bullet is that a majority of voters, regardless of party, support public education. Like, this perhaps should be the headline across the board. So we, the people, believe in our public education system. Over 90% of our nation's young people attend our traditional public schools. And we, when given the choice between increasing funding for public schools or increasing funding for students and families to be able to take with them wherever they choose through vouchers or other universal kind of approaches to taking public dollars to go to private schools, we, the people, lean heavily on supporting public education. So we have a lot of information on our website about this. If you're interested in learning more about the voucher conversation and how to frame dialogue around that, that's engaging and kind of activates your community to think about the challenges and the trade-offs there, we'd love to follow up with you on that. And then another hot topic, and one that has been especially prominent in the news lately, given both the executive order and the mass reduction in force layoffs, firings of federal workers, the majority of people in our nation oppose eliminating the U.S. Department of Education. And this is across Democrats and Republicans. We recognize that our federal agencies can and should do much better. This isn't saying that everything at the Department of Education is perfect. I would argue that no organization is perfect. We should all be works in progress. And so while voters recognize that there are areas that they would like the department to improve in, they are staunchly committed to supporting the federal role in education, safeguarding quality and equity for our students who need it the most. So whether we're thinking about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and supporting our students with disabilities, our Title I funding and supporting our students who come from low-income backgrounds, the array of funding for students from all walks of life. I think about career and technical education that I oversaw, or supporting our English learners. We know how important the federal role is, and that ultimately states hold the reins in education across the board. They always have, they always will. The federal role is not one to determine curricula or standards or teacher qualifications. It's to be a support and to safeguard the civil rights of our students and ensure that all students have opportunities to thrive. So some common ground in all of this across our nation that we do not see and do not hear about in the media. And we want to make sure that you are activating that common ground in your schools and in your communities.
Yeah, and I'll say if you want specifics on some of the numbers, those are some of the general points. You can go back to that poll, all4ed.org/2024 poll. You'll see that. We'll put that URL on the screen there again in a little bit. But if you want specifics behind some of those bullet points and data and how strong they were, take a look there. But one of the things that really resonated with me as a former school and district leader is something that we've preached at Future Ready Schools for a long time. We've talked about community partnerships and branding our schools and the importance of our messaging. But one thing that if I were to put my principal hat back on or my district leader hat back on, I can tell you that time and time again throughout the poll just came front and center is that our language matters. And how we frame things really matters. This isn't about code switching. This isn't about saying, hey, we're not going to tell people we're going to do work over here and pretend we're not doing it. It has nothing to do with that. It's a lot of times people don't understand. If I were to go to a medical conference today and they just buzzworded everything they did, because let's be real, in education, we can play buzzword bingo quite often if we're not careful. Always off our tongue. If I were to go to a medical conference today in Philadelphia and all they did was kind of buzzworded what they do, I would have no idea what they're talking about. And so what the poll pointed out to me, putting my principal leader or district leader hat back on, is when we explain things at times, it's far more connected than some of the buzzwords that they just don't know. And we're going to dive into some specifics related to that. And by the way, that's not a knock against anybody's community by any means. Why would they know, right? We're sitting across from parents and how easily, in ESSA, the one that replaced NCLB when looking at the IEP and the SDIs and tier 2 of RTI, and parents are like what, right? And it's not their fault. It's just not their lingo. But for us, it's just how we do it. So internally, yeah, there's reasons we have, buzzwords and things that we use internally. But externally, we need to be strategic. And one of the pieces we want to bring you today, and we've got a resource for at the end we're gonna give to you as well, is just how we have to be so strategic and so intentional because when we do that, it really can build trust in some of these common ground areas. So we've got 6 of these, and we called out and today 6 different spots that really jumped out in terms of the language, and just to give you some examples of what does resonate. So the first one really being using inclusive language that focuses on student well-being. And so there's a quote as an example, and you'll be able to dive into the poll if you want to see like what resonated, but also what didn't resonate. We'll talk about that. Here's one of those cases where we talk about SEL, or social emotional learning. It's fascinating as I've been able to describe the poll since we've done it to other practitioners. I'll say, when you ask folks, I'm like, well, should schools be supporting SEL or social emotional learning? You get some hesitation by a bunch of groups. Well, we're not so sure. And then we ask, like, should we be supportive of student well-being? And oh yeah, absolutely, across the board. And it's like, well, like, how are you in favor of one but not the other? But what it really points out is, unless they don't know, it's not easy to understand. And so when we think through helping them understand, and what came out with this one really is, as we explain what social emotional learning type things is, again, not code switching, not pretend we're doing something different, not that at all. As we explain what it is, people then understood, oh yeah, that makes sense. Of course we would want to care about that. So a statement like ensuring schools are safe and welcoming for all students, regardless of how they learn, what language they speak, or where they are from. And by the way, the social emotional piece was just one example. A statement like that in that area goes beyond social emotional learning for sure. That's one quick example. Let me give you a second one. Another piece that we noticed in the poll was really encouraging flexibility and that notion of real world readiness. When I look at a lot of these statistics, and we'll point some out, and Amy's going to call some out here in a little bit. When you see over 80% or over 90%, I kind of look at it and I joke like, all right, well, what few percent is saying like, we don't want you to focus, Amy, on real world stuff. Like, don't focus on any of the work. I always say like, I want to meet those folks because I'd love to hear their perspective on what's that about. But one of the things we saw was the encouragement of flexibility. And every educator that I work with, and certainly know in Future Ready, we understand the importance of recognizing every child is beautifully unique. Every child needs a different pathway or a different opportunity. And as our role as educators is to support that, well, that really resonates with the public. We're not just lockstep, one size fits all, right? But also the notion of real world readiness. And Amy started to talk about some of the pathway pieces. We'll dive further into that there as well. And really a third piece there, and we got a couple more coming here in a moment, is the notion of emphasizing multiple pathways to success. And that certainly connects to the flexibility. You can see something that resonated there was providing career-connected learning in middle and high school, including internships and work-based experiences. Just a great example, I think, of, first of all, shout out to many districts that are doing incredible work in these areas. But that's something that we'll dive into here in a little bit further that had incredible support. Amy, any of those three you want to jump in on or comment on further?
I will say, and again, if you want to know more details and get into the specifics of the numbers, we're happy to follow up with you. But I will say in all of these, the way polls are designed is you have, different arguments for, different approaches to what you're trying to learn more about. And so we did what's called split sampling and tested different language in this. And across the board, as Tom said, speaking to the outcomes that you're seeking to accomplish is what's most resonant. On the issue of social emotional learning, for example, when we called out explicitly the term social emotional learning versus split sampling that, having the exact same question where we describe the outcome social emotional learning seeks to accomplish, but do not use the term social emotional learning, the favorability, especially for our Republican voters, rose by 20% when we did not explicitly say social emotional learning. And that was startling to me because we're saying literally the same thing, but when we describe the outcomes, and right now we do have language that is increasingly getting caught up in culture wars and it immediately prompting divisiveness without seeking to really dig into like what does that language mean? What are we seeking to accomplish? I mean, even today, there was a new letter sent out to chiefs, chief state school officers, state superintendents, state secretaries of education, asking them to certify that their state and their districts are not going to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it did not define what that meant. And I feel like diversity is, we polled on this too. This is about like honoring every student, their background, who they are, where they come from. We know diversity is generative. It improves, our workforce competitiveness, our global competitiveness. It is generative and creates like new approaches to problem solving, and it keeps us as a nation leading the world because we can harness the brilliance of high diversity and diverse perspectives to improve and strengthen who we are as people, who we are as families, who we are as communities, who we are as an economy. And so talking about things like we can still use the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity meaning every student gets what they need in the way that they need it and the time that they need it so that they can really engage in learning and thrive. Inclusion gets back to the safe and welcoming, which was the highest ranked thing that voters wanted to see in our schools. They want our schools to be safe and welcoming. We just need to speak very clearly to the outcomes that we're seeking to accomplish, and do not, fall prey to never use jargon, never use acronyms, but don't fall prey to getting stuck in the culture war of this. We know that this is so fundamental to who we are as educators, school leaders, district leaders, and make sure that we're speaking to the why behind what we're seeking to do through using these strategies.
Yeah, such great insight there, Amy. And I'm thinking about the inclusion word. One of the things that you were talking that I was thinking about back of being a principal and thinking about like our special ed population, our ML population, or any of the special populations, and the notion of like we want them included, right? We want to make sure that they are a vital part of everything that we're doing. And when we look at it on that end, that's well, yeah, of course. And so much of these the culture wars and things that we're seeing have taken words and phrases sometimes way out of context, or certainly not what we're looking at. And again, going back to how much that language really does matter. So let's jump over to a few other pieces that we found here. Another one here as well being, when we take a look, this notion of framing things as an investment, not just as an expense. Here we are. I think about this time of year, how many countless hours I spent in budget meetings getting our budget passed. And I know anybody that's listening to this right now, you're like, yep, I was there last night. I bet you were, right? But recognizing when we look at things as these are investments, not just expenses, right? And a lot of times it's, I'm going to have to raise the budget this amount in terms of mills. And when we look at things of like, and focusing on really why it's an investment, economically, even in our regions long term, why it's an investment, going back to some of those early childhood pieces is just an example there. What resonated, we saw this notion of investing in high quality early childhood education to give every child a strong start. I think back to years ago, moving from half-time kindergarten to full-time kindergarten. Well, that's not just an expense. Yes, we had to hire some new teachers. Yes, there were expenses and line items that were added. I'll tell you what, that's a heck of an investment in our community for our kindergartners, going back to just one example there. Another piece that we saw, another one really was the importance here, and I think this is just the best practice across the board when it comes to education, is tying things to outcomes that also, well, I can even separate these almost, tying things to outcomes. Right? When I think about all the work we've done at Future Ready around technology and the effective use of technology, not just buying laptops, throwing them out there and fingers crossed. When I think about tying things to outcomes, I think about even this time of year, the amount of times I'll always have a few superintendents reach out, especially like right around COVID time. Hey, we spent millions of dollars. We bought all this stuff. Our board is asking, because we've got to refresh all this stuff. And our board is asking, hey, we did all this stuff. How do we know it worked? We're in a really interesting spot if it's like, we hope it did, fingers crossed, right? That doesn't look so great. And let's be real, every dollar we spend comes out of somebody's pocket somewhere. We've got to be intentional about it. So directly tying things to outcomes, people resonate, all sides of the aisle on that. And then number two, as we're building here, like some of the things that we're going to call three specific areas out there, tying it to also things that matters to the voters shows, hey, here's the folks ultimately that are paying things for our community anyway. So recognizing here's the things that matter to our voters. Here's the things, since it matters to our voters, we're going to align some of our priorities to that. And here's some of the outcomes in the investment that you can expect. That's a different conversation than, I need you to pay a couple $100 more in taxes this year again, right? And it's the way we frame it is huge. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but the framing really does matter. And the sixth piece we found, really looking at why the language truly matters, a key there being very specific about the solution. One of the things that I can tell you, I think not just buzzword bingo, but we can often admire problems. And I'm talking about myself here, putting my school or district leader back on. And we can talk about issues and talk about issues and talk about issues and talk about issues. But at the end of the day, people also want solutions, right? Well, what are we going to do about this, right? What are we going to do about this? And so it resonated there. Like one example, we'll dive in further into these in just a few minutes, but expanding high-speed internet access in rural and low-income communities to support learning, right? So that's part of that solution. Obviously, that's an example of something that's been front and center for a number of years, especially since COVID. But there's 4, 5, and 6 of some recommendations that we saw in the poll data. Well, again, all those pieces that you can access. Amy, any of those 3 you want to jump in on?
I just want to add an addendum to item 4, and framing things as an investment, not just an expense, is critical right now. Like we saw in this election how important the economy is to people. Like people are struggling economically. And I think with the tariffs that are rolling out, we're going to see rise in prices. Like there's even going to be more consideration of the economic imperative, where we're spending our public dollars. There's a lot of tax sensitivity, understandably, right now, as people are navigating kind of their challenges of just making ends meet. And I think if you're also looking at the flip side of that coin and trying to protect public funding for your district, we found in the poll that if you use the language tightening your belt versus being really explicit about cutting funding that will go to and say specifically the impact that cut will have, voters are very comfortable with tightening our belts, because that's what we're all having to do in this moment as we navigate economic complexity and challenges. But if you be explicit saying, if we cut this, these are the teachers we're going to have to cut. These are the programs that your students are not going to be able to participate in. So both frame things from a strengths-based perspective and thinking about the investments that we plant today that will grow into the future. And then conversely, if you are on the defense side, really be explicit about the implications of the cuts and don't just have it be around a tightening our belt narrative. Being specific across the board matters, and always speaking to your why and your outcomes again and again, you will see as a theme through all of this.
Yeah, so well said. And so we're going to dive into 3 specific areas. The poll, for those of you that check out the data, there's going to be many, many things that you're thinking, wow, that's not really my lens from a school or district leader. And so we siphoned it down to these key areas really for principals and superintendents, curriculum directors, school board members, whatever that role might be, PR folks in districts. I think this is certainly a really important message too. So we're going to hit 3 kind of key areas here. So Amy, what's the first one that we found really for school or district leaders?
So we in this poll had a list of over 20 different areas in education, and we asked voters to rank order them. At the very top was creating safe, welcoming, and inclusive schools. And frankly, this surprised me. And it comes from a notion of us wanting, of course, security of knowing that we send our most precious thing in the world, our young people, off to schools, that they're going to be safe. But also just the notion of people want to be seen. People want their children to have a sense of belonging and connection, and their voices be heard, and them to be waking up joyful and excited to go to school, not fearful and concerned about school. And so what we know, and again, this was the highest ranked item in education for almost unanimous support, 90% of voters believe that our schools should be safe and welcoming for every student. And we know that our students thrive when we foster this kind of belonging, respect, and inclusion. And this gets back again to some of the language drifting into the culture war space. How do we talk about safe, welcoming, and inclusive schools? How do we talk about security and connection and belonging for our students in a way that invites lots of engagement from our students, their families, and our communities to see this as a strength? The reality is they already do. And so I would tap into and activate how important this is to your communities, because we know it's important to all of our nation. And again, we did deep dives in the reddest of red states, the bluest of blue states, the purplest of purple states. And I have never seen a poll in which Alabama and California and Ohio all agreed on the same thing. The numbers are unassailable here. The voters believe that this is the biggest priority. That said, we know we've got a lot of work to do on many aspects of education, but first and foremost, lead with this. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, so let's talk about just a handful of just real quick some action steps, because again, as always, from the Future Ready side, we want to be practical for you all and just give you some ideas to generate what can we do about this, right? What are some pieces? So really taking a look at those policies that ensure all students feel valued, and regardless of what their background is, regardless of their learning needs, how are we handling that as principals? How are we making sure? How are we training our staff? How are we working with our folks in that regard, right? So making sure that our policies absolutely reflect that. Or, as I got ahead of myself there, training educators. What are the supports that we're providing to our teachers? What about for our support staff? What about for our bus drivers, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our diverse and beautiful student population, and encouraging that welcoming and safe environment? As we've called, we've looked at the inclusive culture, which is, you'll notice the Future Ready framework, some of our gears, for those of you that have been familiar with the Future Ready framework previously, called out. But on the outside of our framework overall is that notion of collaborative leadership and inclusive culture, right? And we've been calling that out for a decade now. But when you look at that, how are we supporting our leaders? It's easy to talk about, but how are we supporting our teachers? And maybe your district level folks, how are you supporting your principals with this? The kind of training that may be needed there as well. The investing in mental health. I think back to a podcast episode that I did recently with the principal of the year from Massachusetts, and he was talking about their investments in true mental health in their building and the supports that they were doing. Because let's be real, we have a crisis in our country, and it's not just for students when it comes to mental health, for we as adults as well. And so just understanding, and I swear every principal I talk to, this is on their radar. The importance, when we take a look at some of the behaviors that we're seeing, right, and the struggles with student behavior everywhere we go, we hear about. And behavior is a language, right? Behavior is a language that often, not always, but can support, can tie to some mental health needs and concerns. And we also know how challenging some of those resources are, and just getting the resources. Sometimes we, as principals, we can identify it, we know the need. But then sometimes the reality is it's taken months to get that counselor, that connection, that outside wraparound resource, or whatever that might be. And the last piece here goes back to some of that communication, really ensuring that our schools are providing clear communication and transparency. And that's huge. People respect that transparency. And I know as schools, we're always navigating, sharing information and sharing things out. But sometimes it means we're sharing things that just, hey, they're not the most fun things to talk about, or the reality that we happen to be in. But people also respect, and I would say, and expect that transparency and keys there. So before I get to a couple resources, Amy, anything you want to jump in, or advice for school and district leaders from your lens?
One thing on the mental health piece, and I am the mother of a teenager, and COVID really threw her for a loop. I had a front row seat to the challenges of mental health that our young people experienced then, and I would argue that all of our young people were dislocated. All of us were dislocated during COVID, and we will probably be feeling those ripple effects for a while. And I believe all of us need mental health supports. Many states have statewide approaches to Medicaid funding for school-based services for mental health, for reimbursement. If your state does not, there are a lot of resources that ed.gov has that are out in the public domain that we'd be happy to link to. Like, there are ways to have reimbursement, to have mental health professionals in your schools. And just across the board, like, these are very practical, tactical things that you're probably already doing, but it helps to say them explicitly. How do we make sure that we are being as transparent and collaborative with the families and communities we serve across the board, to make sure we understand from them what safe, welcoming, and inclusive looks like and feels like? I mean, we may all come at this with a different lens and different approach. Don't presume that what safe and welcoming feels like to you is what your students and your families need from your school. So make sure that you're listening deeply, and not just communicating from school to home, but really creating forums for community connection and learning about what they need from your schools to be able to thrive and show up joyful and ready to engage.
Yeah, and Amy, as you were talking there, you made me think about how this also, the data, if you're a principal watching this, superintendent feeling like, hey, I feel like we do a really good job with that, let this also be a pat on the back saying, hey, you've got the public support here in this area. Keep prioritizing it. Keep making sure it's front and center as one of those priorities. And Amy also mentioned some resources, but for each one of these three, we want to give you a couple other resources. About a year ago, we released the Future Ready Guide on everyday wellness practices. Encourage you to check out futureready.org/wellness guide, variety of discussion questions and some other resources embedded in there. Encourage you to check that out. Second, one of our partners, I want to give a shout out to Harmony Academy. They do incredible work, especially K-6 here. And as one of our partners, all of their digital resource stuff is free. And so I should say at no cost to districts. And so encourage you to check out futureready.org/harmony. They do amazing work. We are so proud to partner with them. And so especially if you're at the elementary level up till 6, we've seen 7th and 8th grade use it a little bit, typically has to be adapted. But those kinds of resources and tools for things like morning meetings, and now we're pulling kids to the carpet, having conversations, really to help bring a common language in your school. And just want to give them a shout out. incredible work over at our partners at Harmony. Great for this area to support that safe and welcoming environment. Just a really practical tool for you to use. Amy, what's another piece? Let's talk further about an area that I know you're really passionate about.
I am deeply passionate about college, career, and technical education, and I hold tight to that and in there. We know that, no matter where our young people are in our country and what they dream for their future, all young people are going to need some form of post-secondary education to thrive in, our jobs today, never mind jobs of the future. And that post-secondary education does not mean four-year college for all, but we never want to foreclose on the opportunity for young people to be able to attain a bachelor's degree or advanced degrees beyond that. But there are so many incredible pathways in the sub-baccalaureate space, whether it's workforce credentials, high quality registered apprenticeship, looking at our incredible community and technical colleges. I went to two myself, and thinking about the whole array of post-secondary options and career options. I have a friend who always told me, Amy, college is a really expensive career exploration program. How do we expose all of our young people? Because no matter who they are and where they're going, they're all headed to a job, ideally a career. Let's make sure that they get some early exploration and engagement in the world of work so that our education is student-centered, community engaged, and career connected for every single one of our students, not just our kids who are fortunate to be in high quality career and technical education programs. So next slide, please. And thank you for managing the slides.
Gotcha.
This was one of the spaces where, again, voters overwhelmingly had unanimity in this. We support expanding career and technical education, both through formal means, like funded through Perkins funding and state funding dedicated to career and technical education, but also through broader approaches to thinking about other federal, state, local, philanthropic, corporate, braiding funding streams to support this kind of learning for every single student, not just, oh, the CTE kids are, in the program down the hall, or they go to a career and technical education center for half a day, or there are regional, vocational schools that serve those students. No, this is for every single student. We want it to be a key part of K through 12 learning, not just waiting until high school, but helping our young people understand their connections of what they're learning and practice in their classrooms to the world beyond as early as elementary grades, middle grades. And 91% of voters, again, such an astounding percentage, have a favorable view of career and technical education and workforce training programs. So we know, again, from the economic imperative, that we need to make sure that our young people are ready to lead our nation into the future. We also know that the more education one has, that's correlated very strongly with income. And we're really trying to build out a new approach to how do we ensure every student has meaningful choices about the educational pathways they take that lead them to economic prosperity, but also purposeful lives that connect them to their communities. And this is really the heart of where I see the current and the future transformation in our education system going, is blurring and blending the lines between our P-12 systems, the whole array of higher education, post-secondary education, and the world of work and community beyond.
Yeah, Amy, I'm thinking, we've been talking about this for years at All4Ed, and I know many of our colleagues kept we continued to feel that no matter where we were in the country, this was such a strong suit for folks. And I'm thinking about being in some of the bluest areas of California that were urban, and this being really strong, and then going to some of the most rural areas out in Indiana, and this was incredibly strong. And then being in New Jersey, and this was something that was incredibly strong. And no matter where we were, what state we were in, or different seeing things, it just the opportunity from the public support here is something we really do have to build on for sure, and something that we're excited about. And so from a district or school leadership end, some pieces really working. And this is something we're absolutely seeing across the country, but encouragement to continue to expand opportunities in work-based learning, internships, apprenticeships, providing dual credit, in-demand credentials, career advising. Amy, would love for you after this to jump back in on those as well, because you've done so much work in that area. And again, this is something we've seen a lot of districts in the last decade, but even more so in the most past recent years doing. And one of the things that jumps out to me here, Amy, is how different it looks in different places. And I think that's there's an important piece. I think there's certainly some core tenets here that we're seeing in terms of quality and opportunity for sure. But, when you have a tiny rural district focused in these areas, and then a large urban district where opportunities and connections and partnerships just look different, but yet still doing really great things focusing on expanding opportunities for each child is certainly the key here. Strengthening partnerships with local businesses. One of the things to recognize, every business in the United States is found inside of a school district somewhere. And many times, from my own personal experience, finding that businesses wanted to help, they just didn't know how. And who do I call? 1-800 school district? Like, where do I even begin? What might a partnership look like, right? And so I think sometimes as school and district leaders, we're like so busy running, doing some of these pieces, but being really intentional. I recognize too, many of our business owners in our communities also are our taxpayers or have children that have gone through our school district or whatever that might look like, but really being intentional in strengthening those business partnerships and community, even with community colleges, folks like that, and connecting to some of those needs there. Providing students with the career counseling piece, right? And making sure that this isn't just one of those things that we sit down one time a year and a kid is like, hey, what is that? Should I sign up for that? But that real community connection. And I know for sure our counselors across the board are typically have these massive student populations way beyond what they should. And we fully recognize and understand the struggle related to that. But as school and district leaders, making sure we're prioritizing that career counseling side of things, helping kids have a clue as to what they want to do upon graduation. Sometimes we almost can phrase graduation as an endpoint, but let's be real, it's a starting point, right? And that is not that endpoint. As we talk about different pathways, maybe it's a pathway to college, maybe it's a pathway to the military, maybe it's a pathway to workforce and some of the other pieces that we've talked about there as well. And I love the piece that comes out really around financial literacy and the importance there. To me, I know a number of states in the last number of years have mandated that you have to take maybe a personal finance course, whatever that might be. But let's be real, like that's an area that impacts every one of us every day for the rest of our lives. And as schools, making that a priority there as well is something that we saw of value. And then going back to the notion of equitable access to CTE programs for all students, regardless of zip code and background, and really shifting the lens to opportunities for all, as opposed to we're only going to provide it to these folks or we're only going to provide it to just those folks. And that really ensuring that equitable access is super important. So Amy, this is I know you've spoken a little bit about it already, but I know you could talk for hours on just this slide for sure. But some other things you want to add?
I could certainly talk until tomorrow on all of these things. I will say with the first bullet, getting into the technical side of, federal requirements for career and technical education. States are required in the secondary space, and secondary for career and technical education, by the way, can extend to as young as 5th grade. And so I feel like we tend to invest heavily in the high schools. I want us to build up our middle grades connection into the space as well. But from a program quality indicator, because often we orient our systems to the things that we measure, the things for which we are held accountable, states can decide among 3 program quality indicators: work-based learning, or earning college credit while in high school, or earning industry recognized credentials. And it's or. I know research and evidence substantiates that those 3, when combined as an and, are the most powerful. And I want to say, like, how do we think about a holistic approach, not just for students who are in, formal career and technical education programs, but for all students to have some connection to real world work-based learning? And that's a real challenge at scale. I'll talk about that in a second. How do we ensure that every student has the opportunity to earn college credit while in high school, which is the most research and evidence-backed intervention shown to improve student outcomes, both in high school and in post-secondary, like college-going development, identity development, and college entrance, persistence, completion, dual credit, dual enrollment. It goes by 38 different terms across our country, early post-secondary opportunities, whatever your state calls it. All states are leaning into this. Let's build it in as a matter of expectation for all students, not just access to opportunity, but expectation. And then on the industry credential science, there are literally over 1 million different credentials offered in our nation. And whether industry recognizes it is one thing, whether industry demands it in their job descriptions, what are the industry sought credentials? That's why we really are honing in on in demand. What are the proxies for skills that employers are using that really signify that, a student knows their stuff, that they're going to be able to get a job and grow in that career? And so be aware, like, more is not necessarily better. Please don't do random acts of dual enrollment, because you want to make sure that it transfers to degree programs, and those degree programs connect to the labor market. And please don't do like more is better approach in the industry recognized credentials either, because there are so many credentials that have no connection to students actually having economic opportunities from them. So be really mindful in working with your workforce systems, with your economic development systems, with your business and industry communities, which leads to the next bullet. On working with business and industry, sometimes it's down to relationship, right? Like I know somebody who owns this major, company that's just down the road from my school, and we're going to set up a partnership where my kids can go over and do job shadowing, and we can have mentors come into our classrooms, and we'll set up some internships for students who are really interested in that. That's great. Please move beyond that to institutionalize, so it's not just people-centered, but it really becomes a matter of business. And when working with business and industry, often business and industry starts with the corporate social responsibility side of it, right? It's the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do to partner with schools. We are in a moment in time where we have more job openings than we have job seekers. And even with the job seekers, our employers are struggling to find skilled talent. And so we have this incredible moment of opportunity to really call upon human resources, to call upon not just the moral imperative, but the economic imperative of employers to step up and partner more meaningfully with our schools and our community colleges and four-year colleges and other education and training opportunities, but really backing into our P-12 system, recognizing that this is essential to their bottom line. But also think about chambers of commerce, industry associations, so you're not having to onesie-twosie with each employer, but you're working with employer associations that are then able to broker some of those relationships. There are lots of ready-made nonprofits, other entities that serve as intermediaries that can also help you with this too.
Amy, as you were talking there, I was also thinking about one other piece for school and district leaders. I want to give a shout out to Cajon Valley School District in California. It was one that was recognized in the Unlocking Career Success that you had led during your department, or when you were at the department. A great resource and call out, because in this area, we focused on here on middle school and high school and kind of that conversation, but they actually bring it down to the kindergarten level. And again, not about saying you have to go this route, but it's more about self-discovery. I know they leverage the RIASEC framework. For instance, the A in RIASEC, it's been around for a long time, is artistic. And so they're working with even kindergartners of, hey, if you realize you're somebody that's artistic, what does the world of work look like for, what's a graphic designer? What does a graphic designer do? And it's just built into, but it's intentional. It's built into just the way that they do things in their world of work program, and giving them a shout out. But again, it's not about telling kids in any of these, we're going to lock you into a system and that's where you have to go. It's not that at all. It's about providing that opportunity. But what I love there is the self-discovery. It's the student side saying, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I want to do to be able to live life on my own terms. And so even down at that level, still being intentional about some of the exploration pieces, because let's be real, if a child doesn't know something exists, they'll never be able to be that, right? And just helping them see things beyond maybe what they have access to or been able to experience at home. So let me give you two really quick resources here related to this one. We'll jump to the third. I know we're tight on time, but important conversation here. One, about 6 months ago, or maybe about a year ago at Future Ready, we released our Expanding Career Pathways Guide. Encourage you to check out futureready.link/career path. More there with what we were just talking about. And I want to give a shout out to our brilliant colleagues, Amy, over on our policy side at All4Ed. We have a state policy center, and it is incredible work. And I know if you're thinking, well, I'm a school or district leader, we're also recognizing in our political times today the importance of state roles. And want to give a shout out to our state policy center, because they've done a lot of work in this area, as well as the area that we'll be talking about. And would encourage you, especially if you're superintendent, curriculum leader, folks, take a look at some of that. And it might be something you want to say, hey, I'm connected to folks at the state level. Here's some model policies, or here's a group, All4Ed, doing incredible work in this area. Maybe you should partner with them because we agree with the direction. And so I want to give them a shout out at our All4Ed team. So proud to partner with, so proud to call them colleagues on our policy side. But even though for school and district leaders, check that out. A great resource. I also want to do one more shout out resource on our end is around the Achievery. If you go to futureready.link/Achievery, we've partnered with them, an incredible resource. It takes about a minute to create an account. This is a teacher-facing account. This is not something we have to worry about student data, because there's no student accounts here as well. But there is a lot of resources. They partner with a lot of movie companies, places like a Cartoon Network or a NASA. And then ASCD is also a partner in this with a short lesson plan. There's a lot of things around the career side of it that can be used as mini lessons with a free lesson plan from ASCD, absolutely no cost. really high content. This came out of digital equity funding in the last number of years. Really important work, and a shout out to our friends over at AT&T, the foundation, to be able to support this work. We're proud to partner in that there as well. Great resource for your teacher on that one. Amy, let's hit our third area before we wrap it up.
All right, high-speed internet access in underserved areas. So once again, recognizing how important technology is, especially as we're thinking about what our young people need to thrive into the future. So getting back to one of our first points that Tom made, being specific about recommendations, we know that 79% of our voters prioritize this because they understand the role that technology plays across industry sectors, and also that our young people today are going to experience upskilling and reskilling and lifelong learning, as we all have with the advent of artificial intelligence over their lifetimes. So education is not a one and done. It is increasingly technology enabled, and our young people are going to need to know how to navigate technology, regardless of whether they are in our nation's farmlands or right here in my hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico. How do we ensure that low income and rural communities have the supports they need? We know how essential internet access is. We know how essential navigating technology is. I would argue that our young people are further ahead than we, the adults in the system, on how to use it, but we need to make sure that we're giving them the supports and infrastructure and resources to even be able to access it equitably. So I know this is something that is probably immediately obvious to all of you who are education leaders and who have lived through many different iterations of technology in the classroom, but we wanted to be sure to call this out, recognizing how important it is to drive innovation in your schools and districts.
Yeah, what's interesting to me here is I think back to the launch of Future Ready back in 2014 at our very first summit. This is something we talked about outside of access, because what we knew pre-COVID, about 70% of our educators pre-COVID were asking kids to do something digitally outside of school. COVID hit and it became the, what about kids that aren't connected? Now, let's be real. Prior to COVID, we would actually feature a number of districts that were doing things and recognizing, hey, not all of our kids have internet access. What do we need to do about it? What can we do in these areas? How are we going to meet those needs? So we had 70% of our kids, or 70%, excuse me, of our teachers pre-COVID asking kids to do something digital. But then what we found at All4Ed, when we did the first state-by-state breakdown, 16.5 million kids, disproportionately our Black and brown kids, couldn't. Yep. Which means 70% of our teachers are asking those kids. I've never met the student that wants to say, like, couldn't access that at home. And as COVID proved too, sometimes it's a location issue, right? You can hand a kid a hotspot, but let's be real, it's not going to do anything if it doesn't pick anything up, or maybe you couldn't hop on that Zoom piece. But what's really interesting to me before we get to some district recommendations, we saw the need during COVID. We met the need during COVID, and there was some other funding pieces there. But as district leaders, let's challenge ourselves for a moment. What have we done in the years since? Because if we know the need exists and then we met it, and now we said, okay, now we're quote unquote back to normal, we still know for many the need exists. So what are we doing about that? And so, yes, I fully understand as a former technology director for a number of years, the costs and things associated to that. But if we're still asking kids to do something digital and yet putting them in that same position, I wonder how many grades have been lowered, by the way, because somebody couldn't access something completely inadvertently, and we just put children in really bad spots. And so making sure to continue to leverage any federal state funding that are there, I think, is absolutely huge. Partnerships that are here related to that. Continuing to advocate for policies at All4Ed at Digital Learning Day, we did something where, hey, if you want to be in the loop on how you can take a look at some of these areas, reach out to us. We'll help you advocate in certain areas here and give you some just real data and facts to be able to use, helping to prioritize that digital access and opportunity for each child, just to have the opportunity that they need to learn, continuing to invest in things like hotspots and opportunities. So many partnerships out there, and they look very different. We've seen everything across the board, from buses to locations to hotspots. And we all know there's not one right way to do it. There's not one perfect science based on the location, but kudos to the district leaders that continue to prioritize this, even past back to being back in school full-time relating to that, because it's an issue that it doesn't go away, even that we're back in our seats in our regular school districts related to that. And then finally, making sure that our teachers keep this front and center, right? They have so many things on their plate, but recognizing, hey, this is a conversation that we need to have of, hey, here's the students that we know do not have access. Here's the things that we're going to try and support parents with. Here's resources that we're going to give parents. But what's our plan when we're asking them to do something in some platform overnight that we're asking them to ask discussion questions and it's going to be graded for the next day? What's our plan for those kids that can't? And how are we going to make sure that we're not ostracizing them, but we're making sure that we're including them? Because we care about safe and welcoming schools. And again, that's just an important piece to that. Amy, any other pieces you wanted to jump in before we hit some resources and then our giveaway from today?
I think you hit it very well, and I recognize that this is a perpetual challenge because as the world of technology is rapidly evolving and changing, it's hard for us to keep pace. And so, how do we ensure that we are not just investing in the high-speed access in underserved areas, but ensuring that our schools have the leading technology that students and educators need to thrive, and that our educators are getting the training and the support and the capacity building that they need to be able to foster engaging, meaningful learning through leveraging this technology. So don't forget about the capacity building side. And again, getting back to making the case for investments and justifying these investments through speaking to the outcomes will be essential as we continue to evolve our schools to keep better pace with the technological evolution.
Yeah, and at Future Ready, at our different innovation summits and things we've done in the last number of years, sustainability has always been a focus there.
Yes.
Making sure that we're using each dollar well, but making sure that we're going to be signing that order for those laptops or for that software, asking ourselves, all right, when these things are dead 5 years from now, how are we going to make sure that we can pay for them again? Where's the the funding going to come from? Such an important piece. So let's give a couple of resources for this area. We're going to get you out of here in just a couple minutes. Thanks for still hanging with us. So we also released a number of months back, ensuring equity, access, and inclusion for all, really related to that notion of digital equity and supporting. Another resource, check out futureready.link/equity-guide. And a resource that we had partnered with originally when Future Ready had launched years ago, that's still out there, still cooking. If you're not aware of Everyone On, another nonprofit does great work in this space, you can go to everyoneon.org. You can put in a zip code and you can see all the low-cost options for parents. One practical idea, school and district leaders, is when somebody registers, hey, here's a nonprofit. No matter where they live, no matter what neighborhood they call home in your district, here's a nonprofit that they point out. Here's low cost. We're not endorsing a business or a provider. Here's all the low cost options if you need access at home. If that's a struggle, here's all the low cost options they make available, and then you're sharing with them. Just a quick, practical way during a registration process or a yearly process when we're sending information home, just to be able to support parents with that. Shout out to Everyone On. They do great work with that. Amy, let's see this way. We've talked through probably a lot of these here. So let's just talk about just some of the pieces that we've covered and a couple other pieces, and we'll do this quickly. But as school and district leaders, just the importance of using your voice. Your work matters every single day. Your voice carries a lot of weight. If you're a superintendent here, we recognize that, look, we understand you're one board meeting away from looking for a new job. Like we get that's the reality of things, but your voice carries a lot of weight. It carries a lot of weight with your staff on, hey, these are things that we're going to prioritize. These are things that are important to us or non-negotiables for us, core tenets to our work. Leveraging the common ground. Part of the reason we were so excited to share this with you is don't believe the narrative that everything's polarized, because it's not. Yes, there's a lot of polarization out there, but there's so much common ground, and we can build on that common ground. We can build that trust, build that community, continuing to make sure your district initiatives really align to your community priorities. And I believe as community schools, like that's just our moral and ethical obligation anyway, right? To making sure that we're working in that regard. Continuing to frame policies in ways that just really resonate with the community. We've tried to point out a bunch of those today, being strategic with our language so that they understand, avoiding the notion of buzzword bingo. And finally, making sure that your actions, and we know that this is the goal, but promoting that your actions, that they're there to meet your students' needs. And I think that investment piece there is key as well. Before we do our giveaway and wrap up, Amy, any final thoughts related to what district leaders can do?
The final thought kind of reverts back to the first bullet here, which is that your voice tremendously matters. I want to acknowledge the moment in time that we are in. Like, this is a moment of a lot of disruption and upheaval to some of the federal structures that will have implication for state structures, that will have implication for local structures, funding streams, approaches to education. In the middle of disruption, there is always opportunity. Right now, many states are considering submitting waivers to the U.S. Department of Education to reimagine their education systems. Here is an opportunity for you to speak up for what your schools need, what your districts need, most importantly, what your students and your families and your community needs in your schools to be able to have those strong, powerful, bright, rewarding, joyful, choice-filled futures that we know every child deserves. So whether or not you consider yourself a policy person, your voice has more weight in policy, more influence in policy than mine does as a Senate-confirmed assistant secretary. People hear from me all the time on these things. Our policymakers at the state and federal levels, please, please reach out to them, share your stories of success, share the challenges you're experiencing, and think expansively about the existing flexibilities in fundings, but new approaches that you might need to ensure that you're supporting your students in the best way that you can for them to be able to thrive. So now is a moment for opportunity and for you to think big about reimagining what you need for your schools. If you want some thought partnership on that, please reach out to us. Tom can be a great conduit for this. We have a great state policy center if you want help in thinking about how you educate and engage with your state policymakers. And then, of course, we'd be happy to connect you and support your capacity building and being an advocate for your schools with your members of Congress.
So Amy just shared now is the time, and now is the time we are going to officially launch and share a brand new resource that is completely aligned with everything that we just shared. It brings the statistics, it brings the practical ideas, it brings a lot of the resources combined and the things that we've shared for you. Free download. We're sharing this because we want it to help school and district leaders in the incredible work that you're doing. We encourage you to check out futureready.link/common ground, where you'll find the information. Just kind of, hey, who are you? Where are you from? And you'll be able to access a new PDF that we put together that really just highlights so many of the pieces here. Of course, we're recording this and you can use this with your team. Feel free to share this with your admin team, your PR folks, principals, and whatnot there as well. And also want to just point out again, if you want access to the poll, we referred to that a whole bunch of times in the past hour. You go to all4ed.org/2024 poll. You'll be able to find the specifics and a lot of information, probably more than you wanted when you went there to originally say. Lots of information there. We encourage you to check that out. Finally, on our end, and then Amy, I'm going to give you the last word. We will never do anything that we do from a Future Ready end, whether we're in person, whether we're virtual like today, without saying thanks. Thanks for your work. Thanks for loving and caring about kids. Thank you for the late nights. Thanks for the early mornings. Thanks for tuning in to something like today with all that's on your plate. We see you. We're here to support you. And we thank you for the work you lead every single day. Amy, final words?
Thank you. And in my other languages, gracias and el agua, and onward and upward.
We'll see you next time.